To begin our discussion for first-party data, so Paul had introduced a few concepts, and one of them was the focus for user expectations and how that then translates to regulatory changes. Paul had mentioned a couple of statistics for how individuals, consumers feel about their data, their usage of data. And this is just another kind of means of highlighting that. So this is from a study that was done a couple weeks ago by the International Association of Privacy Professionals, asking consumers how concerned they are about their online privacy. We can see here that 68% of consumers are concerned. Now, we see statistics like this all the time, but it kind of leads to that privacy paradox, right? People say that they're concerned about their privacy, but what actions are they actually taking? In that same study, they actually quantified this. 85% of consumers said that they had deleted an app from their phone over concerns about that app's data processing, what data was collected, how it was using that. 82% of those consumers opted out of sharing their personal information, which I'm sure everyone sees this every day. Consent rates, especially over the last couple of years, have had a large impact on marketing strategies. And 78% of consumers said that they avoided visiting a particular website in response to their concerns about how they were handling their personal information. So it's not just that people say they're concerned. People are beginning to take actions, and all of these different actions impact our ability to understand user behavior across owned and operated properties, better understand our consumers, and better understand the effectiveness and what is happening in our media campaigns, advertising campaigns, marketing. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. Paul mentioned this statistic as well, which is a reason for optimism. After having a privacy experience, 43% of consumers from a Google and Ipsos study said that they would switch from a second choice brand to a first choice brand if that second choice brand provided a better privacy experience. So there's massive opportunity here for organizations that do this really well. So when we talk about first-party data collection, usage, how it is that we're actually going to activate it, it begins with this. It begins with that privacy experience and making sure that we are respecting the rights of consumers in order to be able to gain that trust, thus that we can continue to get people interacting with our brands and providing more of that information. So our first session to kind of talk about this topic, privacy by design, optimizing first-party data strategy through compliance. Now, unfortunately, Jaime, my co-presenter, had an emergency and at the last minute was unable to make it today, so I am working overtime, which is wonderful. But it is perfectly fine. We'll be going through a number of kind of examples and industry examples that I see in working with compliance professionals on a daily basis. Now, when we think about privacy, regulations, compliance, it feels like we're almost all getting a second job. We have to be compliance professionals. We have to understand the laws. It's an unrealistic expectation for marketers and advertisers to be able to understand all of the nuance that is required for compliant data collection, compliant data usage. And so we don't have to be legal professionals. We have other people in the organizations for that. But what's important is for everyone to be compliance conscious. Become conscious about and understand kind of base principles related to compliant collection, usage, and activation of that first-party data. So what I believe to be an effective means of doing this is to kind of use a framework. Use a framework for just base principles that we should always keep in mind. And one that I really like is privacy by design. So privacy by design, 7 principles, was first introduced in 1995 by a privacy researcher, Anne Kavokian, who then worked in the Canadian Data Privacy Office for a number of years. But this was adopted in around 2010 by a number of large global privacy bodies, and it provided the basis and a lot of the inspiration for GDPR. So some of these principles you'll kind of recognize as a result of some of those regulatory requirements. So let's go through them, understand what those principles are, and then I'll provide some examples of what organizations that are doing compliance and compliant data collection, privacy-centric marketing really well, the things that they focus on so we can take some of those away. So our first principle of privacy by design is that privacy should be proactive, not reactive, and it should be preventative and not remedial. Too often, traditionally, organizations have kind of tacked on the compliance process at the end of the strategy kind of design process. So we'll think through a marketing strategy, we'll then send it over to legal to get final approval, and hopefully we get that thumbs up. This cannot happen. We have to start moving it kind of up in the process, and again, being proactive. I was on a call with a chief legal officer and their head of technology a few weeks ago, and they had identified some potential compliance risk in their advertising technology data collection. And the technology professional was like, well, we didn't know this was happening. It's a third-party tag on the website. I didn't know that they were collecting that information. The chief legal officer said that something that I loved. Ignorance is not a defensible position. It is negligence. So we have to, again, be proactive, really understand everything that is happening, and then starting to embed a lot of those principles. So how does this look for organizations that do it well? Well, oftentimes we're talking about a legal professional that understands the law, technology professional that's actually implementing things, configuring our data collection architecture, as well as the advertising and business that's actually defining the use cases and what it is that needs to be accomplished. Successful organizations bring those individuals together in kind of a compliance council so that they can, on a regular basis, discuss use cases, go through changing and the evolving environment, and then be able to define global standards or regional standards, depending upon kind of how your organization is set up, that could then be cascaded down. So that folks at individual brands or folks that are working within individual channels have a foundation from which to work from. So getting all of those individuals in the room, defining standards, and putting together various different things like POVs for new features, new functionality, new platforms, new solutions that might be available, calling out compliance risks, calling out ways in which you can mitigate those risks, and then how it is that individual business units can be adopting those new technologies. Now, our second principle of privacy by design is that privacy should be the default setting. Now, this is kind of forced here and in Europe in general with GDPR. If we think about consent, it is an affirmative consent model, whereas in, say the US, it's more of an opt-out consent model. But this principle is just that the consumer should not have to take an action in order to be able to express their privacy rights or have privacy rights afforded to them. Now, we see this kind of more recently, and I'm sure everyone saw it in their day-to-day work, with everyone's deploying new consent management platforms across their websites, even in, and again, for successful organizations, deploying those even for markets that do not have to have those types of disclosures or do not have to provide that consent experience, but doing so because of this type of a principle, as well as doing so because of the understanding that, as we talked about kind of in the intro there, that is what consumers expect. Consumers expect to be told exactly what is happening with their data, how it's being used, and be given the opportunity to be able to cut that off or to say no. So making privacy the default for everything that we do and not forcing the consumers to take some sort of an additional action. and thinking about that for all of our strategies. Now, obviously, this has a business impact. Consent management platforms, consent, for many organizations, 50 to 60% of your observable traffic is no longer observable as a result of not being able to collect some of that data. So there's a change management process that is necessary here, but this is also where a lot of technology is starting to develop new solutions in order to be able to fill those gaps. And we'll learn about a number of those in some of the later sessions for how exactly that's working. Now, our third principle here for privacy by design is that privacy needs to be embedded into design. I think about this in a couple of different ways. Number one, the design process for strategies and solutions. I mentioned at the very beginning, for oftentimes just tacking on compliance or legal at the end of the process. They have to be involved at the very, very beginning in order to be able to collaboratively come up with a solution. I love how one of our clients puts it. She's the head of compliance for a global children's toy company. So a lot of requirements there that they're facing. And they do this extremely well. And I've asked her before, like, how is it that you all are able to be, effective? Like, your marketers seem to be super happy. You guys are, maintaining super low risk. It's going really well. And she said that she always drives home the point with other people within the organization. I am not your enemy. We are all on the same team, and we all are working towards the same goals. And it's important for everyone to keep that in mind. If you have a new solution or a new technology that you want to use, involve legal and compliance early, understanding that you're all on the same team. Now, what they're able to do in that scenario is provide the constraints and considerations that need to be kept in mind. We're able to then understand the business impact and then effectively evaluate, is that solution, will it actually work for us? What are the trade-offs? And what needs to be true in order to bring it to life? Another example here is we work with a number of healthcare organizations. And they're dealing with health data, which you cannot pass to third parties. But they still need to be able to leverage a lot of the in-platform functionality for things like optimization. So how can they optimize campaigns, optimize bidding strategies, if they're not able to provide even conversion data to those different platforms? By embedding privacy into the solution design process, we're able to kind of work through and work with their legal to understand, okay, we can use new technologies like server-side tag management in order to be able to obfuscate all values, remove any kind of a personal identifier, remove any kind of an indication of even what is the content for that page prior to then sending it on to third parties. So they're optimizing for campaigns, but when they're looking within the ads platform itself, they're optimizing for campaign 1. They're optimizing for campaign 2. Not necessarily any of the actual kind of sensitive or potentially sensitive information that may be there. So by involving legal early in that process, understanding the constraints, having technology at the table as well to understand what's possible, and having business there to understand the use case, we're able to design that solution. Now, that's how we often think about design for this. I also like to think about it a little bit more literally. Think about the amount of investment that you all are making in your actual user experience. You probably have multiple different product teams, all focused on the website application, focused on how do we improve different user flows and things like that. Now think about the very first touch point that any single one of your consumers is going to have with your digital properties or with your brand. It's the consent experience. It's the pop-up that they have that is disclosing to them what is happening. And way too often, that gets overlooked. The design of those things is just, we use the default that's provided to us by the platform. Our technology teams are the ones that are actually configuring all of these things. Thinking about that privacy experience in the context of the design and the user experience of the overall kind of just digital properties is super important here. And it's something that a lot of organizations can do a lot better. Our fourth principle is that everything should be full functionality. Positive sum and not negative sum. Users should not have a decreased user experience. They should not be able to do less with our brands or with our digital properties as a result of being able to, or providing them various different privacy rights. Now, a clear example of this is Meta's pay or okay consent model in Europe, which unfortunately is beginning to be adopted by a number of various different publishers also in Europe. And with this model, you either have to pay in order for your personal data to not be used for targeted advertising, or you have to provide that data as well as have a more intrusive ads experience. That's not positive sum. That's negative sum. I have to trade my privacy rights for the ability to express those. So that's a good example of what not to do. Now, it's challenging. The reason why that type of a solution is even put forth is because so many business models are predicated upon the collection, the usage, and the application of that personal data. So it is hard. We have to rethink a lot of the various different strategies that are in place, and again, put privacy first. Now, the fifth principle is for end-to-end security and lifecycle protection of data. Now, this gets into a little bit more of the security side of things, which we don't need to talk about which hashing algorithms are the best and whatnot. But just to drive this point home, 3 weeks ago, France's CNIL released a study or a report reviewing data breaches that have been reported to them, or notifications reported to them for data breaches since 2018 with the start of GDPR. So 5 years. In those 5 years, they have received 17,483 breach notifications in that time period. That's almost 10 per day. So when we think about the protection of data, especially personal data, it's super important, and it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when will something happen, and what are the protections that are in place in order to be able to make sure that it is remediated as fast as possible. Now, this is extremely important because, going back to that same Google and Ipsos study before, the number one driver of loss of customer trust was breaches. Consumers had 44% decrease in the amount of customer trust with an organization as a result of them becoming aware of a breach of their data. Now, also for lifecycle protection, this becomes very important. We'll talk about, and Paul mentioned them, a number of AI solutions. We have all kinds of new tools that are being introduced, new solutions that are being introduced. And if we think about lifecycle protection for the privacy of data, just because we have a user record doesn't mean that it can compliantly be used in every new solution that pops up. Was it disclosed for whatever use case you're starting to think about it for? Is it allowed in whatever the jurisdiction is? So even thinking about lifecycle protection for privacy considerations, it's not just, hey, we threw a banner on there, they said okay, we collected it, we can do whatever we want. No. We have to be able to apply what is it that we can do even for past collected data collection. Our sixth principle is visibility and transparency. This is ultimately what people want. It needs to be transparent. What data is being collected? How is it being used? From that Google research, 71% of people said that they preferred to buy from brands that are honest about what data they collect and why. And that rose to 82% of people that had those concerns for privacy consciousness. This is really what people desire in order to be able to gain that consumer trust. And it's what is critical in order to be able to collect effective first-party data to drive and use within our various different platforms. That's super necessary in this new environment. Now, visibility and transparency first, I guess, the opportunity that's there. If we think about those consent banners, we're all users of the internet. They're awful. It's a terrible experience. And a big reason why is because organizations write those disclosures to speak to regulators instead of to consumers. So the opportunity is there. If we can be more transparent, if we can be more direct and actually write things in an understandable way, there's just so much advantage, I guess, that can be realized there. The other side of this is kind of thinking about the usage of data for multiple different use cases. There was, last month, a large investigative story in the New York Times talking about car manufacturers in the United States. A lot of them have started to implement various different technologies that collect driving behavior data for users. Now, top line for this is that it helps you in the case of an emergency, automatically doing an emergency call type of a thing. It also helps them to be able to improve their products. Buried in the terms and conditions was the fact that they could share and sell that driving behavior data to partners. One of their primary revenue streams of those partners is selling that data to insurance companies, who are then using driver behavior data from drivers, from owners of those cars, and impacting insurance rate premiums that were being then quoted to those individuals over time. Legally, they could do it. Lawyers said, hey, this is fine, but it's in the terms and conditions. It's there, it's disclosed. Not really. No one's reading those things. It's a complete misrepresentation or a complete obfuscation of how data is being used. That made it on the front page of the New York Times. That then even led to investigations and congressional action for those types of practices. You don't want to be there. Our final principle kind of sums it all up. Respect for user privacy. Keeping everything user-centric. For so many years, we talked about the primary kind of principle for marketing advertising was customer centricity. We wanted to place the customer at the center of everything that we did. We need to understand online touchpoints, offline touchpoints. Who are they in order to be able to deliver the best experience for them? Still true, but we need to modify that a little bit, and this is why we talk about privacy centricity. The customer is still there, but ultimately prioritizing the respect for the privacy of that individual, putting it more on what are their expectations, what is it that they want, what are their privacy rights, and then building everything around that. So we're still placing the customer at the center. We're just shifting a little bit to be able to prioritize their wants and needs as opposed to what it is that we need necessarily as an organization. Now, again, we can't expect everyone to be a compliance professional. I think I might be the only person in the room that is excited for after dinner tonight. I can go back to the hotel and finish reading the new US federal privacy bill that was proposed on Sunday. But not everyone does that, which is perfectly understandable. So that's why it's important. Start with just base principles. Keep 7 base principles in mind for privacy by design. Start adopting those throughout the different actions that you're doing within your organization. And be one of those 43% of second choice brands that becomes a first choice brand because you deliver a superior privacy experience for your consumers. That translates to business outcomes, and important for our discussion today, it translates to consumer trust which allows us to then collect first-party data, better understand our consumers, and then extrapolate those insights in order to be able to attract new ones.